Hey Guru Nation, quick video on this, although I do want to go more in depth because this is a favorite topic of the industry. It's a favorite of tech vendors and people trying to find solutions. And I get it, like, this is a multi-billion dollar industry, clinical research, year over year, one of the fastest growing industries as well. And it's like some of the tools we use are like Flintstones, and we're living in the age of the Jetsons. So I get it. There's like a gold rush to try to make this industry more efficient, and there's plenty of areas where you can do that. But somebody asked me a question on LinkedIn. One of these people thinking of starting a startup that's going to solve another one of the industry's most notorious problems, which is long startup timelines for sites. And let me break down, like, I'm not a Debbie Downer. I use a lot of tools. I'm going to get into some of them just quickly. I'm actually going in depth on another video on the benefits of some of these tools, specifically when it comes to study startup. But I'm going to give you my rationale for why there's a limit. No matter how good technology is going to get, there's a limit to how efficient we're ever going to be in study startup. Study startup, there are a few different components at the site level. Number one is the IRB, Initial Site Submission Form. This is already pretty streamlined. You have to, somebody, like a coordinator usually, has to fill out this form. Probably takes about 30 minutes. Sometimes the IRB gods are friendly and smile down upon us and say, hey, we have your PI's information on file. We have a lot of the information. So it's streamlined in a way. Sometimes they don't. It just depends on the IRB. There's probably 4 to 5 main IRBs that we alternate, that we use, central IRBs. So some busy coordinator, what it boils down to is some busy coordinator has to do this and has to take 30 minutes out of their day, submit it. Sometimes the application gets sent back for stupid reasons, like you forgot to check no here, or you forgot to put Y and you really meant to put yes. And then that sounds like a simple thing. Well, have the coordinator just log back in and do it. Well, what happens when the coordinator only had that 30-minute slot to do it yesterday, and this thing gets sent back 2 days later, but now that coordinator is busy with patients or out of town, and there's a backup coordinator, and the backup coordinator is not going to do it. They're just going to wait for the regular coordinator to come back, and then when the regular coordinator comes back, they're swamped with other things. So this very simple thing that takes a minute to fix just took maybe a week or more. And that's if the coordinator remembers to do it. So that's IRB startup application. The rest of the stuff, pretty straightforward. You've got financial disclosure forms that need to be signed by the PI and all the sub-Is. You've got 1572, which needs to be completed and signed by the PI. You've got licenses, CVs for the PI and the sub-I. You've got typically certain documents that need to be signed by the PI, like the protocol signature page, the investigator brochure acknowledgement page. All this is great, right? There's also things like, as you get closer to site initiation, there are things that start getting involved in training, like training logs for all the staff. Did you do training for all the vendor portals? There's oftentimes 10 vendors per study. So there's a lab vendor, there's the aforementioned IRB, there's the ePro vendor, the EDC vendor, cardio core vendor. There's vendors for everything in this industry. So having the right staff do all those trainings also is time consuming. I don't see how that could be streamlined. Now, going back to the things that need to be signed by the PI, 1572 financial disclosure form, protocol signature page, investigator brochure acknowledgement page. Sounds simple, right? It is. But a couple of things have to happen. First of all, the coordinator, who's the one preparing these documents to streamline it at the site level, they gather everything and they say, okay, Mr. PI or Mrs. PI, here's the things you need to sign. here, Mrs. Sub-I, here's the things you need to sign. Here, Mr. Sub-I, here's the things you need to sign. A coordinator has to do that. Again, coordinators are super busy. So that's one thing. Now you can be thinking, well, what about digital signatures? Like Viva has, sites.viva.com, we use it. It does streamline the process, but it doesn't replace the fact that this coordinator, this overburdened, overworked coordinator, still has to follow up with all those people, Mr. PI, Mrs. PI, Mrs. Sub-I, Mr. Sub-I. So now you're going from, hey, here's these papers, please sign them. And the way we used to get physical paper signed is we would literally wait outside the clinic when the physician or sub-I, nurse practitioner, or PA, physician assistant, is done seeing patients. We would literally loiter in the hallway, and we still do, and get them to sign stuff physically. So now you're saying, okay, well, we switched to digital, everything should be fine, right? Sometimes. Oftentimes, these clinicians, they're so busy. Let's take my PI, for example. My PI and my sub-Is, they're so busy. We're in an underserved area in Yuma, Arizona. They don't even carry their cell phones with them during the day. My PI, you try to text my PI during the day, during 8 to 5, you're not getting an answer. You email my PI during the day, 8 to 5, when he's working, you're not getting an answer. The only way you're getting an answer is if you stand outside his office and try to catch him in the 2 minutes that he has from patient in room 1 to patient in room 2. And you've got like an elevator pitch basically when he's there, like, hey doctor, like, let's sign this real quick. So digital signature in this case doesn't actually make things easier. Matter of fact, it might be a little bit harder because instead of me bringing a paper and say, hey, sign this real quick, now I'm waiting out there and saying, hey, in your inbox, there's something for you to sign. And not to mention, he's in the same time period getting probably 50 other emails from vendors, from non-study people, from medical science liaisons. Everybody wants a piece of these clinicians' time. So it still boils down to the coordinator orchestrating things and telling them, no matter how good the tech gets. So I'm not saying that digital signatures don't work, because we've started incorporating Viva for digital signatures, and it does help. But we have to time it to where we know, the coordinator knows, when the PI has lunch break. And we know the PI will only check things at the top of his inbox. So we trigger the signature to land in his inbox at lunch. Then we go into his office and say, hey, just sent something. It should be at the top of your inbox. Can you please sign it? That has streamlined the process because now we don't have to wait outside his office with a piece of paper. We can just catch him on his break. We know when he has time or when he has days off, we can get these things streamlined. And it does work for the coordinators. Digital signatures, like when it comes to delegation of authorities log, definitely huge game changer for the regular study staff that does clinical research full time. For our clinicians, which are PIs and sub-Is, they alternate between clinical research and their private practice. So they're busy. So this is why, no matter how good the tech gets, if you don't think about how can we empower these busy, overburdened, overworked coordinators, we're never going to get anything accomplished. This is why I love Viva, because they actually have this framework in mind when they're designing their products. This is why Site Vault works. And this is why I love Versatrial, which is like, I've had them on the podcast. It's like a bookmark for all your vendors. Like I said, you have like 10 vendors per study. Bookmarks for the vendors, and it even streamlines the feasibility process, which happens one step before the startup regulatory, where you're applying to get a study. I personally use it for the feasibility. Tech in this situation works great. So tech does work. Streamlining feasibility and startup processes do work, but they're not the cure-all. They're not miracles. They're not, until you replace a clinician with a robot. So when my PI becomes a robot and my sub-Is become robots, I think we can use tech to fully streamline this process. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening in my lifetime, or maybe even the next generation's lifetime. So until then, tech vendors, we got to think, how do we make life easier for coordinators? Let's be realistic about this and not be so idealistic that we get lost in the crowds, because I just broke it down to you how this stuff happens at 80% of clinics, maybe more. Let me know your thoughts on this. I'm on LinkedIn scrolling the news feed, and I'm kind of fed up with people drinking the Kool-Aid and they don't understand how this stuff actually works. Shout out to Viva, not only for sponsoring my channel, but for understanding how sites actually function. And they're creating these tools with the site coordinators in mind. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Bye-bye.